Holly, good to see you again too. Tonight we have a special history program. Ward, it's been a privilege to have you as a friend for all these many years. I'm thrilled to have you be able to do this program. We're going to learn a few different things here than we did 20 years ago in this church because things have changed. Obviously, we don't have some of the older members we had. We have some new young members coming in here, and you've been pastor here for 12 years. One of the fun things about the Bow Church and Mount Gilead and Campground are both the same way. You both have about 20 people in attendance, and I've always thought, I attend Centenary Methodist Church, it's a little bit bigger church, and we had a pretty good sermon this past week on developing our small groups within the church. And that's one of the things you have to do is develop your relationships and your friendships within your small groups at the church for the church to continue to thrive in a bigger church congregation. The thing about Mount Gilead and the thing about Campground and so many of these other small churches we've gone to, they're already a small group. They've already got it down pat. That's part of the reason they continue to survive and thrive and move forward. And this church has been moving on for over 200 years. Your family has been here in this neighborhood watching this take place. You've got connections both here, family members in this cemetery, family that's went to this church, as well as you growing up in the church literally across the street from us. So, Ward, it's a special privilege to have you here to tell us a little bit about the history of this church and hopefully mention a few things about Centenary for us as well. Because we won't otherwise know about Centenary Church unless you tell it. I've been asking you to do that for a number of years. You could stay seated if you like, or
I'm going to stay right where I am here.
That'll be fine. Ward, thank you so much.
I preach from here whenever I have to play the piano. Otherwise, I preach from that stool over there. But anyway, so I went through a lot of different things in the last 3.5 years, as many of you know. I had COVID that was about as bad as anybody has COVID, and they didn't expect me to live. But I was on a ventilator for a month and had to resuscitate 15 times to get me back and all. But I survived that for some reason, and I'm glad I did. And then I went to a funeral up in Ohio for a 102-year-old lady, and as I came out of the church, I threw my coat in the back of the car. I fell in the ice and broke my left hip, and drove all the way from Bangor, Ohio to Terre Haute with a broken hip. But it was my left hip, and I could drive with my right foot, so it was okay. They say I'm tough, anyway. So, and then a year later, the other one had, I guess, sympathy pain. I don't know. So I got 2 new hips. I'm the bionic man, I guess. And then I'm just recovering from having laryngitis. For 7 weeks, I had laryngitis and couldn't talk very much. And I had to have guest speakers 2 Sundays. And then I had short sermons, which nobody complained about, for a couple of weeks. I'm getting back to normal now. I'm thankful for that. We don't know what caused that. I suspect it had something to do with they did a scope down my esophagus, and I think that's what messed it up. But of course, nobody will say it is. But, they don't want to take responsibility, but it's okay. Main thing is I'm doing better. So enough of that. Well, the Cumberland Presbyterian denomination is not a real big denomination, and it broke off from the other Presbyterians back in the early 1800s, somewhere around 1810, down in Tennessee, and that's why Cumberland Mountains, okay? That's where they get the history of it, at the home of a man by the name of Samuel McAdoo. Now, we have something special in this church that nobody else has. He's buried in this cemetery. It's kind of like Methodists having Wesley in their cemetery. Or other denominations having somebody that was one of the founders, or like having Jonathan Edwards or someone, So anyway, so he's buried out here, and it's a tall white stone, pointed stone. And a few years ago, some people from a Cumberland Presbyterian Church, in Missouri, came up and scrubbed the stone. And it's pretty neat. So sometime when it's not so hot, take a walk out there and you can see it. But he was one of the 3 founders of the denomination, and we have the privilege of having him buried in our cemetery. I mean, that's just amazing, isn't it, when you think about it? So it's like Methodists having Wesley or somebody, And so anyway, we won't go into all the history, and there were some differences between them and the other Presbyterian, and it's mostly over the issue of election. And at that point, the other Presbyterians thought that only a few select people were going to be saved and you didn't have any choice. Now, I'm not sure that too many people really believe that now, but anyway, that was a belief at one point. And the Cumberland Presbyterians did not believe that. They believed that salvation was open to anyone who would call upon the Lord. So that's the reason they separated. And doctrinally, they're probably closer to Methodist than to Presbyterian, although in organization they're definitely Presbyterian. And so through the years, they've had several either Methodist or Free Methodist preachers here. And they've had some, they had a Baptist for a while, they've had Cumberland Presbyterian, they've had various ones. But we're all serving the same God, okay?
Yes.
I happen to be Free Methodist. I was raised United Methodist. And there was a guy here that was 22 years. What was his name?
Oh, Harold Kemp.
Harold Kemp.
Yes.
Some of you may remember he was dean of men at Greenville College when I went there. He happened to be Free Methodist. So they've had some different denominations still in the pulpit. But the main thing is we all love the Lord. We all believe in the scriptures and all that. So we're of the same mind. And so in fact, I had the privilege to do something interesting a couple years ago. We wanted to ordain elders in our church. Now, Presbyterian elders are different than Free Methodist elders. And Free Methodist elders are ordained ministers. Presbyterian elders are ordained lay people. And so they said, well, Ward, you can do it. You're an ordained minister. So as a Free Methodist, I ordained 2 Presbyterian elders. You know what that tells me, though, is we're all serving the same God.
Yes.
It isn't that big a deal. And they didn't have a big deal with it. I'm glad they didn't, and I was able to do that. But that gives a little bit. I don't need to give any more history of that, except this church then was one of the early Cumberland Presbyterian churches, and it's one of the oldest ones in existence. I don't know how many are older than this. Not many. It's definitely probably one of the oldest Cumberland Presbyterian in Illinois.
Yes.
And it's even one of the older ones in the nation. And now Campground is also a Cumberland Presbyterian. And Nina Marcoux grew up in Cumberland Presbyterian down where?
Southwest Missouri.
Southwest Missouri. And so there are quite a few down in that area. There are quite a few in Kentucky and Tennessee, a few here in Illinois, and so on. It's not a large denomination, but it's a group of people that are still willing to serve the Lord and speak, you know. So anyway, so that I wanted to share that with you. And that one of the founding pastors here was a man named Reverend David Tenney. And I believe, if I understand it right, he was the one who died fairly young and is the first person buried in this cemetery even before the church here. Or because it was like a brush arbor to begin with. You know what a brush arbor is? It's where they actually make a shelter out of brush. And that's where they met. More like a camp meeting. They were camp meeting people, the Cumberland Presbyterians were. Much like Methodists, Free Methodists, and other denominations that had camp meetings. So that gives you a little history of that. And so there were a lot of different people here. Now, one of our long-term members is Jim, and I wish Jim could be here tonight. And I am recording it. I don't know if he'll be able to watch it later, but Jim is our oldest member, been with us the longest. He was carried in as an infant, so he never knew any other church, really. This was it. And that's why they drive past another to come here, but this was where he grew up. So anyway, so that was, and like I said, there were three ministers that were meeting at the beginning of the Cumberland Presbyterian denomination, and they had all-night prayer meeting, and they were spiritual people. Really wanted to see good things happen. So that gives you a little background of and I don't know how many pastors, I've got a list here, and it's a long list. I think Harold is the longest one at 22 years.
Yeah.
I'm probably the second longest one now with 12.
Reverend Jones was here.
How long was he here, do you know? Probably not 10 years, was he?
No, I just can't.
Don Jones' dad was pastor here for a number of years, and that would have been, and I don't know how many, But I think I'm the second record now for a length of time. And my last church I pastored for 15 years, so maybe I'll be here longer than that. I was at Vandalia for a church for 15 years. Never thought I would pass that by, but who knows? Unless something happens to me and they kick me out or whatever, we'll see what happens. But anyway, they haven't said anything about kicking me out yet, so I don't think they're going to. Anyway, I love these people. We have some wonderful people here in this church. And I think they love the Lord, and they want to see the church continue. In fact, they want to see it continue so bad they put a metal roof on it. What, about a year or two ago? And those are last for what? 25, 30, 50 years? Or more? So we hope it is still here.
You're starting towards that 200.
What?
You're planning on that 250th there.
That's right. I talked to a member of my denomination one time. They said, why don't you have them join our denomination? I said, you know what? Probably would have been closed a long time ago. I said, they're doing very well. They're taking care of their building and their church. And there's no reason to change any of that. You know?
Right.
And because they've been keeping it going for all these years. Last Sunday we had a pretty good Sunday, 30. That's not huge, I know. But we run anywhere from 20 to 35 or 40. It varies, but we're thankful for everyone who's here.
Ward also mentioned your Saintspirations when you're going to have that, because that's a very successful program that you've been.
We started that probably close to 8 or 10 years ago. I don't know, it's been a long time. The Saintspirations. And right now, I'm waiting and see how our pianist Ruth is quite sick right now, and she was off for several months, and because of her health. And I had to play the piano during those months, and I did have somebody else come and play for a hymn sing. But I'm hoping she'll be able to do one in September. That's the goal.
What's your usual attendance when you have that?
Well, we have a hymn sing. It's as many or more than we have tonight. Usually it's somewhere around 70 people. It's pretty exciting to have that kind of response.
And from all
And they come from all over. I never ask what denomination they are, because I don't care. But I do ask what town they come from. And it's interesting. They come from Vandalia, they come from Mulberry Grove, they come from New Douglas, they come from Highland, they come from Litchfield, all over. And it gets advertised and they hear about it and they want to come because a lot of churches don't sing hymns anymore. And we just use that red hymn they'll use tonight. And you call off a number, we sing 2 verses of it, and somebody else calls off a number, and we do that for 1 hour. So I hope you folks will come back when we have it. And we advertise it, try to get the word out, okay? Many of you have been here for that, I know. Okay, so, like I said, there's been a number of pastors through the years here. The last Presbyterian pastor was Melissa Goodlow, who served for a few years just before me. I think the problem was she needed a more full-time position. So she went back to Tennessee where she could. I want to tell you a little bit, and told you about the history here. I actually went to a little country church just across 140. There's a blue house over there that a lady lives in, and you'll see it when you leave here. That was where the Centenary Methodist Church was. Now, that little church, they actually tore it down and they built that little house out of the materials from that church. At one point, Mount Gilead owned that building. It was given to them. They thought they might put a parsonage there, and then they changed their mind and sold it. But it was supposed to say, supposed to be given to a church, and so that's what happened. And so there's another connection where Centenary gave the building, or the conference did, to Mount Gilead, and then they sold it and used that money probably to buy a parsonage. So that was kind of an interesting little thing. The other thing is that I went to Centenary. It was called Centenary because it was started on the centenary of Methodism, the 100th anniversary of Methodism. And there were a lot of Centenary Methodist churches that were started at that time. And so, and it was a combination of 2 churches. One of them was called Mount Horeb. And it was over in the pasture next to the Victor Hunter farm that belonged to my great-grandfather, Reinhold Sussenbach, and later my Uncle Paul. there's still a little pasture there where the cemetery and church was. There must be people buried there, but there are no stones.
There's two stones.
2 people.
There's two stones.
There are 2 stones.
There's two stones.
Mount Hill.
Military markers.
And it belonged to you guys, didn't it?
Yeah.
Barbara and her husband lives there after Uncle Paul. That's my cousin, who's married to my cousin.
Yes.
And so that Mount Horeb, there was a church there at one point, a little Methodist church. And then there was a Methodist church called Mount Sinai. Now, I went to Sinai school, and I'm assuming that's the same connection. Now, I don't know if the church was where the school was or not, but it's somewhere around there, because in that same neighborhood. So there was Mount Sinai and Mount Horeb. And at that point, when they started Mount Centenary, it was a combination of those 2 churches. Now, here's an interesting fact. My great-great-great-grandfather, Thomas Hunter, was a charter member of this church and was also a member of, maybe it was Mount Horeb, but it was Centenary. It was that group. So he was a Methodist and a Presbyterian. I guess he wanted to make sure that all bases were covered. And he fought in the War of 1812, and he's buried out here in this cemetery. My great-great-great-grandfather. See him? Okay, my wife's buried out here, this direction, or wherever. And my wife's buried out there. I have a brother and a soul for another brother. I have a brother-in-law. I have Barbara's husband's buried out there, my cousin. My grandparents, Gus and Minnie Sussenbach, Reinhold Sussenbach and their family. All the Hunters are my relatives, and a lot of them are buried out there. The Gillespie, some of them are out there. And the Wards. There are stones you'll see here that have Ward on it. That's my great-grandfather, John Ward. That's where I get my name. So I'm the only Ward Sussenbach in the world, I think. Because that's combining English and German. So anyway. Well, enough about that, but I thought you'd like to know that. Now, I never attended here on Sunday that I don't remember, but I came here for Bible school. Because we didn't have a Bible school. So we always came here for Bible school. And I also remember coming here because the Hunter Union was held here in the basement for a potluck. And people like Margaret Smollinger and others had all this wonderful food that they made. Right, Donna? So that's part of the history. I remember attending cemetery picnics out here. Anybody ever heard of a cemetery picnic? To young people, that sounds really strange. Why would you have a picnic in a cemetery? It was a fundraiser for the cemetery. And I think they still do one down at the McHenry Chapel. That's the only one I know that still does it. But we did. My mother helped cook green beans. I imagine your family were involved. Jim's family. You remember when you were young? When you were married? Probably weren't doing it much after that.
Pleasant Mound also had it.
What?
Pleasant Mound also had it.
Okay. So we had a cemetery. I remember standing up on a wagon and singing a song for them. And Bob and Jan Martin Cracker Jacks. We were both about 6 years old. Jan was part of this church anyway, so. Tip and Mary Martin's daughter. Jan and Max, and anyway, so those are kind of some funny little stories. I told you I remember attending VBS here. Years ago when Jim was young, they decided to put a basement under this church. And it was Jim's dad that was doing it, right?
Well, all of them.
And Jim was helping out here.
Jim and Tip and all of them.
The problem was they had it all excavated and they were worried about people being in the building when they were excavating underneath it. So for a few weeks, I don't know how long, they met with the Centenary Church. So there's another connection. The two church, they were like kissing cousins, you know. I mean, they worked together, those two churches, which is pretty neat. So they met over there, Now, over there, I have a picture of an organ, an old pump organ that your cousin Jim has now. This organ, only one person thought she could play. Her name was Clara Comer. I don't know if you ever knew Clara. Well, Clara lived out here on 140, between here and town, anyway. So every Sunday, she put all the hymn books on top of the organ stool and carried them out to her car. Now what that does is, when she's not there, there's nobody to play it because she has the organ stool and the books. But there were a few times when she missed, so my sister Ruth, who was a pianist and organist, had to play the pump organ, and they found a chair and found some other books and stacked up so she could sit on it. So I still remember that. We always wondered what happened to the stool. Well, I think it got sold with Clara's stuff when they had off, so, because it went to her house. But that's just a funny little story. The music wars have gone on forever. The control has gone on forever, okay? Anyway, enough of that, but I thought it was kind of funny. And poor Claire, I hate to say it about her, but it was pretty funny. Well, Claire was, well, I'll say a couple more things. Bless her heart. She tended to be very paranoid. She would call up John Brown, that was Jeff's grandpa, who was the sheriff, and would ask him that somebody had put a seed in her keyhole and she couldn't lock her door. She had John out there all the time at her place. She put ads in the paper, well, the person who stole my hens and left roosters, please return the hens. And Ben File brought me a copy of that one day, that article. I remember, it was in the paper. And another one was the person who stole my hen and left sick ones. So, as I said, she was a bit paranoid, but anyway. Well, I think that was kind of the turning point for Dad, and he said, we're down to Mom and me, us 5 kids, and Clara. And Grandpa Sussenbach, maybe it's time to move on. So at that point, I'm not sure why they didn't join in with Mount Gilead, but I guess they were die-hard Methodists, so anyway. So they went to the Greenville Methodist Church. But that's not this church, but it's all connected. It's all connected. So I thought you might enjoy hearing that. I don't know that you never had an organ here, did you? A pump organ? You know if they ever did?
Not in the period of time that I've been here.
Does anybody know? Have history? I don't know. They had a piano.
Yeah.
And by the way, I was going to mention this piano is a recent gift in memory of Ben and Mary File, many of you know Ben and Mary,
Sure.
and Joyce Hiley, who played it for 60 years, the other piano. And the other piano is being donated to the senior center. Because there's nothing wrong with it, it's just old. It's a Boulder Acrosonic, and it's better than the one they have. The one they have, the keyboard moves up and down when you play it. I've tried playing it. So I offered that one, so they're supposed to be moving it, but anyway.
There was a piano years ago. When they changed the piano, they'd take it downstairs. Well, here in the last, probably 30, 40, 50 years, no piano has went downstairs anymore. You know,
Well, you get down and then you gotta get it out sometime. And then there is some moisture down there, which isn't good for you either, so. By the way, I want to comment, some of my church people did an amazing job this last week. That floor was scraped and painted like you wouldn't believe. If you notice, it's a beautiful floor. Well, some of them are here tonight that were involved in that. And it was a wonderful gift they gave. They wanted to do that because it was starting to look kind of rough. Okay, so, trying to think what else that I've missed here that I should have shared. By the way, here's a picture I thought was kind of fun. This is my grandpa and great-grandpa. I think it's Gus Sussenbach and John Steele with their Morgan horse out in front of Centenary Church. Special beautiful thing, isn't it? I'm glad I had that. And it's not in color, it's more beautiful than this, but there's the organ. I was telling you about. Well, anyway, now, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. So some of the families, I'll just mention some of the families that are part of this church are buried in the cemetery. Like there was the, now what was Jim's family? I have that here somewhere.
Oderson was still.
The what?
Oderson was still.
Yeah, and there, it was there's a history of their family that were part of the church. The John Gillespie family, which was my grandma's family, and if you know any of the Gillespies. The John Hunter family was a huge family, and you'll see Hunter stones all over the cemetery. And my great-great-great-grandfather Thomas, like I said, is buried out here, War of 1812. The Reinhold Sussenbach family, my great-grandpa. The John Calvin Ward, they were Methodists, but he had a name Calvin, I'm not sure. That's usually a good Presbyterian name, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's a little bit about that. So you have questions. And some of that stuff came out of this Mount Gilead history book, which was Gerald Jenner put together years ago.
yeah.
And I wish there were more that could be available. It'd be nice to have it reprinted, but I don't know. Okay, who has questions or anything?
One thing I was gonna say, one of the other families that was here, of course, was a very large family, was the Wellman family. About 1 mile west of here was the Wellman family home. And I've got several of the Wellmans are here. Ted is here with his niece.
Is Ted still here?
Ted's here, he's back in the back, and his niece Kim is here somewhere too, I believe. And that's one of the other very, very large families that was here in this community, as part of this church. And the Matthias Wellman, and both Matthias Wellmans are buried out here, but I lived in that old farmhouse for a few years. And just to add a little bit on that thing about Centenary, whenever Centenary folded up, they did give the Dudleyville Church the little pump art went down to, I guess they closed your church about 1950.
Yeah.
The Dudleyville Church closed about 1955. Whenever the Dudleyville Church closed, my Aunt Lena bought it, and that's how they got the organ. The organ got from there. I knew Art, so we and I were talking one time, and I said, well, we actually have the organ from Centenary Church, and he's like, I used to play that.
So I went over and played it.
And
took
so, lo
pictures.
and behold, he and Jim are the same age. They went to school together, hadn't seen each other in probably 50 years. And you just went down there to see the mules one time. And my cousin Jim said, by the way, can I see that organ? And he got to go in and actually play that organ that had been in that church from many years ago. The other thing that came out of that church was the pulpit from that church. Went to Dudleyville for a few years, and then when Dudleyville closed up, that pulpit went down to the Methodist Church in Keysport.
Oh,
And about
okay.
10 years ago, we did the program in Keysport. And the pulpit from Centenary and Dudleyville Church is down there at the Keysport. It was down there whenever we were down there a few years back. But that's how he was able to find that organ after all those years and still actually.
We thought it went to a Methodist church over in Metro East. We had misunderstood, and it was here close by.
Yeah, it went down to the Dudleyville.
I tried to talk him out of it, but I haven't convinced him.
I haven't got him convinced of it yet.
That's okay.
I just thought I'd add that in and then mention about some of the other families that was out here as well. Reverend Tinney, David Tinney, died in about, I believe, 1819.
He was one of the first pastors.
He was one of the first pastors that was leading a tent meeting to start a church in this neighborhood, and he is buried out here. So he passed away here. On
Is
this
there a
side.
stone for him?
There is a marker up for him, but I don't think it would have been the original stone. But one thing I will mention, and Cindy, we may want to do something out here for a cemetery walk here. If we could do it on a little more temperate night, tonight would not have been the night to do it. This cemetery, because it has been this church has been so well established and so well taken care of all these many years, there's a lot of natural sandstone markers up here that date back to the 1820s and 1830s here in this cemetery. Some some of the oldest tombstones in Bond County are actually here in this old part of the cemetery, just to the south right here. And so this would be a very good candidate to come out here so we could walk around and let people take a look on a little more cooler evening perhaps to get to see some of the things here. But this is one of the oldest and earliest marked cemeteries. But that Reverend Tinney is one of them that was here from 1819. The cemetery is about 4 years older than this church.
actually, we got every, ward. Somebody is buried.
Yes, campground is the same way. We have burials from virtually every, you have a Revolutionary veteran out here too, then? Is there a Revolutionary veteran?
So, I mean, I think.
It's interesting, the man who was the founder, you know, that's buried out here,
Mm-hmm. McAdoo.
he was born about the time of the Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Because on the stone you see that date, it's in the 1700s.
And he actually moved here. I don't know that he ever ministered here, maybe you do, but McAdoo founded this church, founded the Cumberland Presbyterian Church down in Tennessee. About 1828, he actually moved here to Bond County, and Bond County became his home. And he has family members that are also buried here. That's how this became his home church.
Does anyone know if the McAdoo who was the band teacher here years ago was related to him?
And,
I wonder.
Genealogy-wise, I'm not
There was,
sure on that.
a long time ago, there was a man by the name of McAdoo who was a famous band director at Greenville. And I just wondered if he would have been one of his descendants, but I don't know.
But McAdoo and his family did move here, but we're talking 1828, 1840. He lived here from say 1828 to 1841 or something like that. I think that large monument that's out there was probably erected in the 1870s. That's that kind of era of stone, that big nice monument that he has.
Who else has a question, anybody? Yes.
With the age of this church, was it associated with the Underground Railroad?
Not that I'm aware of, but it could have been. By the way, this building, I didn't mention this, was built in 1860. So we just had the 160 something anniversary for the building. There was a building before this, it was just south of this a little bit. And then before that, there was a brush arbor. And this building has had about 3 different additions. The first addition was, the basement was probably the first. And then after the basement, they added the Sunday school room on the back here, which probably included the kitchen under it, but I'm not sure how that worked. And then the south wing was, but then also the entry was added at one point too, and a steeple was added. And I think, who was it that wanted to do the steeple? Was it, you remember? I heard there was some controversy over it. But whoever wanted it got their way.
I don't know.
It seemed like it was Arnold Hunter maybe?
No, I don't know, I can't say.
I'm not sure.
Kepler or one of them, but we do have a picture out front on the vestibule.
Yeah, there's some pictures of the vestibule there. So this building, and by the way, this is the original ceiling. At one point,
There were stoves.
there were stoves on each side, and I think they went up and went out the center. We had the same thing at the Centenary Church, because I remember there, on cold days, we would sit around the stove, because it was a small crew. And Sunday school, one Sunday school class sat around this stove, the kids. My brother Tom was the Sunday school teacher for all of us kids. And we sat around the stove on this side, and on that side, it was the adults. Because it was too cold, you wanted to be close to the stove. And I'm sure the same thing was true here.
Yeah.
Same kind of building, you know. And I think the Centenary building at one point had 2 separate doors, and maybe it was divided down the middle. Who knows? At one point, maybe the women sat on one side and men on the other side, which a lot of old churches used to do, you know, a long time ago.
And we do have this, one of the stoves in our house.
Okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and we've got the, one of the jacks that lifted the church up.
Okay.
Anybody else have questions or comments?
Because that was Jim's job, I think, he was just a little boy. But he went around and, I don't know if he's given everybody some water, but they had to do that all in sequence to get it raised up. We do have one of the jacks.
Yeah, they were worried about the thing maybe being dangerous, that's why I said they meant it. Yes.
You keep saying cemetery. I thought when a graveyard was at a church, it was called a graveyard, not a cemetery. I thought cemeteries were away from graveyards, or from churches.
I don't know, I've never heard that discussion before, so I don't
I've
know.
always thought that, yeah.
We call it the cemetery here. That's also what they're called a graveyard, so I don't know. And an interesting story about the founder of Methodism, John Wesley, he got kicked out of his church, so he sat on his father's grave and preached in the cemetery. And I saw a picture because a friend of mine just visited there recently over in England, and there is the grave was above ground. The shape of the casket was above ground, covered over with stone or whatever. And so he sat or stood on that and preached because he was not allowed in the church. Kind of interesting story, but anyway.
With that, Ward, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I've wanted to hear some of your stories for this for years. We talked a lot back and forth about his aunt. Did your aunt by any chance take home the firewood to keep it? I know you said about she was concerned about theft. That's why she always took church animals home.
Yeah, I don't know, I never heard about carrying the firewood.
But she didn't take the firewood.
I just heard about the hymn books and the
The hymn books and the church.
And I wondered what happened to the organ stool, and I figured it out. It was sold with her stuff when her stuff was sold.
Yeah.
She went to the Methodist home in Lawrenceville, and they had an auction that sold all her stuff. And so that's where the stool went in church.
Okay, well, very good. Ward, thank you so much. Let's move on.
And we have a few ornaments left from our celebration last year. If anybody would want one, they're $15 each. I'll be back here if anybody wants one.
Oh, very
They're Christmas tree ornaments with a picture of the church. And the picture, by the way, I'll tell you where it came from. Tom Doughty, Dr. Tom Doughty, used to work at the prison. And there was a dentist that worked at the prison who was a photographer. And he made up a calendar and gave it to Tom. And it had this picture in it of this church. And Tom said, well, that's the church where Ward preaches. Tom and I have been friends all our life, you know. So that's what happened. And so I got permission from the guy to use that and print copies of it, and then we were able to use it on that. And it's on our Facebook page too, but anyway. But it was taken in the fall of the year, and it's a gorgeous picture of the church.
And it has the years on the back. Mount Gilead CV Church celebrating 200 years, 1823 to 2023.
And how many got to see the replica last year in the parade? There were several people that helped us with that and put that together, and well, her husband was one of the main ones who designed the steeple and all. It was pretty amazing what he did. And now it's on display every Christmas time at the farm museum.
Oh, neat.
It's a replica of Mount Gilead.
That's
And
neat.
it was pretty special.
Good deal. Thank you again. Carrie, would you care to join us up there? I'm gonna have Carrie give the benediction, and Donna, if you can come on up and you and Ward lead us in the closing hymn. We'll have Carrie go ahead and close us with a word of prayer. Thank you all for coming this evening. I'll let you say a few words, and then they'll close straight up. Yeah, thank you.
I really appreciate Kevin's doing this for so many years. I grew up in a church like this. The parsonage across the road, 5 miles from the nearest town, and non-denominational church. And so I love coming back to the country churches, and Kevin's been doing it a long time, and I really appreciate it. So let's have a closing prayer, and then Donna will come and lead us again.